I'd like to welcome to the podium Ted Graham, Jim Stanford, and Angie KRAMER. Ladies and gentlemen, you will have seen in your program that Tony Keller was to be here. I'm clearly not Tony. Tony has excused himself to deal with a ailing parent in Montreal, so our thoughts are with Tony, and I hope I can live up to his billing. I'd like to introduce our panel first. Ted Graham is the innovation leader at PwC, where he helps turn ideas into invoices. He is also the founder of South Core Innovation Hub, which is a collaborative group of innovation leaders from Toronto's unique waterfront area. And he often speaks to audiences about the 5 things I learned about disruptive innovation as an UberX driver, and how to apply some of these lessons across a multitude of industries on the cusp of disruption. And Angie KRAMER is the CEO and founder of JobBliss. Angie is a freelance relationship, which is a freelance management platform, right. Yes? JobBliss removes that expensive middleman and enables companies to build, grow, and manage their teams of freelance employees. And Angie has spent over 18 years of technology innovation experience in marketing and technology development, including customer loyalty programs, brand strategy, and social media. And our last panelist is no stranger to the OES dais. Jim Stanford is an economist with Unifor. Jim has received his PhD in economics in 1995 from the New York School for Social Research in New York, and also holds economics degrees from Cambridge University and the University of Calgary. Jim writes an economics column for the Globe and Mail, appears regularly on CBC TV's The Bottom Line Economics panel, and is the Vice President of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel members. So today's panel is entitled The Changing Nature of Work. And when Trevor called me this week and said, unfortunately, Tony's not going to be able to join us, could you sub in? I had just returned from the lobby of MasterCard, where we unveiled our brand new floor plan and seating plan in our new office, where we're moving to in 2 weeks. My first question when I looked at it is, where are the doors and where are the walls? Because this new seating plan and our new office at MasterCard is literally open concept. Not one single team member will have a closed office. Not the president of MasterCard Canada, not a vice president, not HR, not legal counsel. We will entirely be in an open concept system. And the other interesting thing is, no 2 team members will sit together. And the whole idea is we are a tech company, and we see ourselves moving forward, and the only way we can move forward in this fast-paced environment of a technology company is through collaboration and open dialogue. So for an old school gal like me, this is going to be a brand new world, but clearly the workforce is changing. And so I think this panel is quite timely to be having this discussion, because I don't believe we're the only organization that's moving or has moved to that type of concept. But it goes beyond just where you sit. It's the changing between the employees and the employers. It's, some employers are adopting new workplace models, and how does that affect, and what's the implications of the shift, and so on. So that's the things that we hope to discuss here today on the panel. And while I have some questions, we'd very much like to hear from you, so please start thinking of your questions now. We're going to kick off the panel. I'm going to ask Angie the first question because I think I'm quite interested, and I know the audience will be quite interested, why you started your company. And then after that, maybe you can just give us a sense of what's happening in Canada, in Ontario, in this space.
Absolutely. So I, like Joanna and Jennifer yesterday, am an accidental entrepreneur. I never intended to start a company. I was just sick of the issues that I was dealing with on a day-to-day basis. I come from advertising. I've run teams of up to 100, but generally around 40 to 50 people. My job is to get things done. If a client budget goes away, I have to lay people off. If a new client comes in, I have to scale up. It's very stressful because nowadays, and I'm sure you've run into this yourselves, there are more and more skill sets needed to get a job done. If I hired every one person that had the skill set I needed, I'd have a team of 200 people. That's not viable. So how do we remain nimble? So I was getting so frustrated. I build websites for a living. I went home, I sat on my couch, and I said, why don't we just build something that will make it easier for both sides? Because the only way I could ever scale up or down properly is if I used freelancers. But if you've ever used a freelancer before, you've probably found them through a recruiter, and a recruiter will take a 70 to 90% markup on every hour they work. That does not make their existence very easy, because they're getting a large chunk taken from their hourly salary. So I built what I call the Airbnb for, I know I hate using the Airbnb term all the time, but Airbnb for freelancers or for flexible workforces, where employers could book freelancers ahead of time. They could build a database of talent and build a relationship with them. No more of these one-offs or driving down to the bottom. Actually get to know these people and give them the benefits of full-time, the job security of full-time. So we built an application, and I'm a startup, so it was all bootstrapped. I entered something called Women 2.0. Now, we thought it was a good idea, but we're from Ontario, and we're overly nice. And I went down to San Francisco. We were the only Canadians that won out of 10 globally. And we showed them what we were doing, trying to create nimble workforces and fix the way freelancers and employers work together. And their response was, we haven't figured it out either. So if you can go do this, come back in a little while and we'll give you all the money you need. So I came back to Ontario and we kept building out the database. We launched it and it started flying. People were signing up left and right. CFOs were signing up. Really skilled talent. We had CEOs of companies that were getting engaged. And we had 300 companies signing up, booking freelancers in ahead of time. And that's when I knew we really did have something that was important. So what we did was, and I'm sorry the story is so long, I'm almost done. We did a lot of due diligence to make sure that this was actually something that was viable. And what they told me down in San Francisco was that 50% of the American workforce was forecast to be freelance by 2020. And we're already at 53 million people in the US. We did a cross-Canada poll to see if this data actually reflected what the Americans were seeing. 40% of Canadians said that they wanted to be freelance, but they had obstacles in their way. And 39% of the people that were surveyed actually said that they're actually doing freelance anyways, on the side, on top of their full-time job, trying to get out. So these were pretty shocking. So we know we're onto something. It's coming our way. It's just how do we manage and deal with these people and help these freelancers have the job security that they need to be one person, man, woman, machines.
Great. And Ted, is this the type of trend you're seeing in the work that you do for PwC?
So, we have a different sort of scale than ANGIE and JobBliss has, but it's very interesting to sort of look at what she's doing. We, as PricewaterhouseCoopers globally, employ something around 200,000 people around the world. We're a 167-year-old, what started as an accounting firm, but now is rapidly morphing into a consulting digital audit and tax. And when we look at sort of what's changing in our workforce, one of the interesting stats that came up to me the other day was we have a younger average age than Google right now. The average age in PwC is about 27. So, we employ your daughters, sons, nephews, nieces, grandchildren maybe. And we are often a sort of a starting point for a lot of people in their careers. And it's interesting to sort of have that sort of freshness there and talking to some of the millennials who've joined our firm. So, I've seen some of these trends both from what we've done globally and some of my own active freelancing. You mentioned I actually spent the last 13 months as a part-time UberX driver to see if it could teach anything to a 167-year-old firm. And believe you me, there is some lessons about feedback, about customer service. It's not all, sunshine and roses, and there's some things that, we looked at carefully from that. But let me talk about sort of three specific things. And we think that the millennials that we employ are looking for certainly flexibility, as you mentioned. They want a tech-enabled experience, and they want opportunities for global impact. Somebody on another panel mentioned the opportunity to work globally, and we certainly promote that amongst people who want to stay with us. So we've tried to accomplish that with a few programs. We have a new marketplace within PwC Canada to try to give people opportunities across our lines of service. We have more of a mobility board where people can see opportunities. By the way, we're hiring somebody to do behavioral economics, and they're going to be trained in Sydney, Australia over the Canadian winter. If you know anybody, we're hiring. We're working on something called the PwC Global Accelerator, which is helping take Canadian tech startups and bring them global even before they go public. An awesome opportunity for some of our Canadian associates to work with rising companies. And then, recently we just announced a joint business relationship with Google. So we are going Google in terms of our collaboration software and all the things and the tools that people use in the workplace. The second thing is around seeing our own clients and the different business models that they are considering. The last panel talked about the sharing economy, and we had looked at the rise of that, and we see that being a $335 billion business by 2025. And so the implications for that is you'll see some large companies moving into these sort of asset-light or agile workforces, as they're sometimes called, or more pejoratively, the gig economy. And we are sort of very carefully considering what some of the economic and social impacts might be on this. And we've actually tried to structure some of our services about helping larger companies understand this. Many of you know that companies like Daimler Chrysler has gone into this area by investing in Car2Go, where they've seen the move from access over ownership, and they are investing in a new model that may have us reconsider, if it's going to be access to a fleet rather than everybody having a car in their driveway, what that might mean for the Ontario economy and the workforce. The other thing that we're investing in, we hope to grow from we're a $65 billion company around the world. We want to grow that business, but we think that our own mix of employees will be independent contractors and full-timers. We may need to rent data science folks because we can't employ them full-time. And that's a really, I think, smart decision to help us with our growth. We're actually opening up a tax service delivery center in London, Ontario, where we're going to be employing a lot more Canadians just out of school and new Canadians as well. So we're looking forward to that. You don't often hear of a sort of a nearshoring opportunity. And then finally, sort of the third trend that I'm seeing is this rise of people having visibility of their networks in their workplace. So I'm talking not just about sharing your LinkedIn profile with somebody. We're actually actively mapping out our associates and our partners' networks, both inside and outside the organization, so that their impact is actually more than just themselves. So, if I used to work at McKinsey, Mike Katchen used to work at McKinsey. If I can talk to Mike about what's disrupting financial services, I have an outsized value to PwC. And the more that we can have that visibility of the networks that people bring to firms, I think you'll actually see that more part of hiring and promotion decisions in terms of the intellect that you can bring from outside the organization.
So Angie and Ted, there's a lot to pick up on what you said, and we'll do that. But first, Jim, what are the risks and opportunities that you see from your perspective with this change in the workforce?
Thanks, Jennifer. Well, just to talk a little bit about Unifor first, to kind of match what Angie and Ted were saying about their organizations. We are also trying to evolve to address some of the changes in work practices, including some of the challenges that they pose to working people, and trying to be innovative in some of our strategies in that regard, in addressing some of the downsides, if you like, from workers' perspective. For example, around the issue of part-time work and the scheduling of hours, which has become a big issue. This is an issue that's hitting our bargaining tables all over the place. And we had, I think, a significant breakthrough this year in our new contract with Metro stores in Ontario that now includes some new systematic rules and protections and notice periods around scheduling issues, which is a big non-monetary area. Even some of our organizational forms are evolving, where we have, with the creation of Unifor, a new way of forming a local union that allows for union representation and collective action in non-traditional, flexible or precarious work settings. We have a union of freelance workers in the media sector, for example, who don't have a single employer, where we do try to put in place template contract language and other provisions of the freelance agreement. I'm tempted to say that Unifor is the Uber of unions, but I'm not going to go there, at least not until Uber drivers are unionized. Then I can say that Unifor is the Uber of unions. But this is a huge change, and you're right, Jennifer, from a policy perspective, there's risks as well as opportunities. There's lots of, very excited discussion about gigs and flexibility and sharing. I'm not sure that use of the word sharing. When I look around the world today, I see a lot less sharing, frankly, not more. So I think that word is a bit misused in this setting. For some people, as workers in some fields, there's a lot of opportunity and excitement and flexibility that comes with this mode of non-standard, non-permanent, flexible work, if you're a software engineer or an innovator of some kind. But I think we do need to be honest that does not describe the work that most people in our society do. It's one thing for a software engineer or an advertising specialist to move from gig to gig and to have some confidence and excitement and security about what that means for them. I think it's quite another for a retail clerk or a truck driver or a home care aide or a healthcare aide in a hospital. And if we're realistic and look at the numbers, there's a lot more of those people in society and are going to continue to be a lot more of those people in society than software engineers or video game designers. And the solution to the problems they face cannot be, well, why don't you become a software engineer? That obviously is an individual solution that may or may not be feasible for them. But collectively as a society, we still have those other jobs, those less glamorous, less interesting, less in-demand jobs. And we have to, I think, collectively take on the task of trying to understand what flexible or precarious work arrangements means for most people and put in place the right practices, the right morals, and the right regulations, frankly, to make sure that people are not suffering because of it. They estimate now that about half of all jobs in society have some dimension of precarity in them, whether part-time job, contract work, agency jobs, different forms of self-employment, or dependent contractors. And then frankly, it's not even a new thing. If we actually take a historic perspective at how work has evolved in the long history of capitalism, if you like, this is actually not something new. There used to be a human resource staffing practice in Canada's mining industry that went something like this. A whole bunch of desperate people would line up outside the mining office on a given day, and the boss would come out and point to you, and you, and you, and you. You're working for me today, picking the healthiest, strongest, most compliant workers from that list. And they went in and worked for the day, and then they went home. And the next morning, they all came back, including those people who had the job yesterday, to find out if they were going to get another gig. Okay? So is that the gig economy? I don't think they went home and said, I got a good gig. I think the workers in that situation went home and said, I got exploited today. And the fact that we're seeing different incarnations of ultimately a similar model where employment is contracted on a just-in-time basis with very little obligation on the part of the employer and very little security for the worker doesn't strike me as something that's necessarily modern or some kind of change that we should just automatically embrace. There are some benefits for employers. There are some benefits potentially for workers, but I would say that in many occupations there's more downsides than upsides, and the challenge would be how do we manage and regulate those forms of flexible employment so that people can still have a decent life and support a family and have some basic security in the course of that. And simply replacing people who currently drive taxi who have jobs driving taxi, not great jobs, not well-paid jobs, and occasionally with some benefits, not always, replacing that with people who do it on a part-time basis, generally under the table for tax purposes with their own cars, does not strike me as a step forward. And this is why there is a regulatory issue. It isn't just because people are stick in the mud. It's because there are important social and economic and moral issues associated with that transformation in the nature of work. And we can't push those under the carpet under the guise of embracing what's new. So those would be some of the challenges, if we're honest, that I think we have to take on.
Good points raised. I guess one of the questions, though, that we might, or we should probably just examine off the top is, what are workers' priorities? I mean, you know, Ted, you talked about, you know, hiring millennials and so on. I'm not sure the millennials' priorities for the needs in their workplace is the same as, you know, someone like myself who calls myself old school or whatever. So how, is that a fair assessment, and how do we balance that?
Well, in the cocktail party last night, I was hearing a story about somebody who'd hired a summer intern, and she worked very hard to find this intern a full-time contract, and was very proud that she had done all that work and had offered this to this, you know, intern who showed promise. And she turned around and said, "You know what? Thank you very much. I'm actually going to become a full-time blogger. This is my dream. I figure I can do it. If I'm not going to do it now, I'm never going to do it." And she was astounded that this was the reaction. But, you know, I think if we look at this sort of generational shift in terms of, I want purpose-driven work, you know, I want to make an impact, this is my time, I think, you know, we're certainly seeing big changes there in those priorities. I do want to take a second to sort of, you know, not let some of Jim's comments go unanswered here. You know, Jim brought up the idea of the sort of exploited, you know, Uber X drivers, and, you know, I'm writing a book called the Uber of Everything, so, you know, Unifor being the Uber of unions is just giving me fodder for the book, which is great.
Don't quote me on that, Ted, or my gig could be over.
Yeah.
I've got a website for you.
So my period of exploitation by Uber involved me making about $40 an hour for working, you know, the shifts I wanted to work. If I wanted to, during the Pan Am Games, turn on the app from my home at Yonge and Eglinton on my way down to 18 York, I could make money by basically carpooling with people. You know, you've got taxi drivers making $8 an hour, driving 12-hour shifts with people who have, you know, earned rents on medallions that, you know, is sort of the unintended consequence of some regulation around the supply of these things. So I would say that, you know, you can take some examples like, you know, mining looking at, you know, healthy people, but we're talking about knowledge work and people using artificial intelligence to supplement their work, which is actually creating brand new opportunities that never existed before. So I think we need to sort of shift the discussion a bit.
Angie, why don't you pick up on that point, if you would?
The idea of full-time, there's no such thing as full-time. And I don't think anybody in the room can say that they know that they're good at, well, maybe somebody in the room here, but like in the outside world, a full-time job, all it gives you is the benefits and hopefully a severance package if you get let go. So, and that's not that much. So the reality is full-time really isn't that secure. Most full-time people are worrying about the day that they're going to get laid off. And that puts a lot of stress on people. So what I'm finding is the people who are actually embracing the freelance economy have been laid off. They don't want to go through it again. They have a skill set. They might be a home health care worker. They might be a librarian. It doesn't matter, but they want to know that they're going to have control over their lives. And that's what freelance really is. The word freelance is a bad word. It's a bad term. It denotes that you can't get a job. It's quite the opposite. These are skilled people. So I would say allowing these people to have more of a full-time life, that has to be our objective, because these are the people who are the entrepreneurs. These are the people who are going out and trying new things, but they don't have the support system in place. Millennials, they're always going to want to have the next new thing, and I don't blame them. They saw their parents get laid off. They don't want to be in the same boat. They want to have so many skills in their pocket that they can walk into any job and with confidence say that they can do it. So we've created this environment of almost fear, of having to know the next thing. So and again, when we looked at the numbers, it's 40%. The other 60% were very happy being in a full-time job. Those aren't going away. But we need to create that safety net for the other 40% that want to do this and who are going to benefit the economy with their new innovative ideas and skills.
Jim?
Well, we could have a debate about some of the particular industries at play, but I think we also want to look at the sort of the policy framework. Full-time jobs are going away. That is the reality. The 40 to 50% of people in society who have precarious jobs are not there mostly by choice. Some of them are, and I think in this room we live very privileged lives as people who are highly educated and have specialized skills that are in demand. But don't think for a minute that those sorts of jobs are typical of most of the jobs in our society. So the people who've lost a full-time permanent job with pension and benefits, and that's huge. That's a huge difference to people's lives and their family lives when they have a health benefit that they can fall back on when their kid needs braces or glasses. You can't write that off. People are losing those jobs and getting jobs with part-time hours when they don't know when they're going to be working and when they don't have any benefits to fall back on. The Ontario government, to its credit, Jennifer, actually has taken this bull by the horns in terms of the policy response. There is a major initiative that the government's taken this year called the Changing Workplaces Review. And maybe I'll just take a minute to mention it, because I think everyone in the room should be following this closely. They appointed 2 advisors, Messrs. Murray and Mitchell, very good, knowledgeable labor policy experts, one management side, one more labor side. They've held hearings across the province. They've taken submissions from any interested parties, and they are actually looking at this issue of precarious work, non-standard work, the gig economy, and saying, how do we respond? What is the mixture of risks and opportunities? And what sorts of protections are there to ensure that people who don't have a totally in-demand, hyper-marketable skill are treated fairly as the workforce transitions? So Unifor made a submission to this, a very comprehensive one with about 43 different recommendations. I brought a few copies of this along if anyone's interested. There were many other submissions, and I think this is, the government is to be credited for trying to take a proactive approach. Again, not sticking their head in the sand, saying we don't want this to be happening, just as Unifor isn't sticking its head in the sand. We may not like some of the nature of the changes, but it's our responsibility as a union speaking for working people to find new ways to deal with that and to deliver some real benefit to the members who pay dues to show that we can make a difference in a labor market that's increasingly precarious and increasingly flexible. So I hope that the folks in the room will learn a bit about that review. They're going to make their recommendations, I expect, later this year, and I think they'll be part of the important overall thrust by the provincial government of trying to, again, adapt to these challenges, but in ways that are socially beneficial rather than exploitive.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for reminding us and informing us about that government study. Jim, I think one of the things that the government has been looking at, and in fact in some departments implementing, is the flex time. And Ted, you mentioned this, I think, in your opening remarks, but I guess the question is, what is the workplace losing by having people work from home? Or is it losing anything?
Well, Marissa Mayer, the CEO of Yahoo, famously sort of called back all of these remote workers a couple of years ago, much to the chagrin of people who had, pretty cushy home offices and sort of, had salaried positions without really showing up very often. You certainly lose a bit of collaboration and getting to know people face to face. Interestingly, you may have seen me last night at the cocktail party with our telepresence robot. We've been experimenting with different forms of people working remotely, and part of it is you need to actually spend some time together with people, getting to know them outside of a business context before you can have a virtual relationship with them. We use that telepresence robot typically for a team member who has spent some time with us, and they want to be able to show up at the office virtually for the other parts of the time that they can't be away from their family, or there are other reasons why they need to work from home.
Angie, I'm sure you can add to the value of working from home.
Working from home. I unfortunately can't find anything negative from working from home because I've seen so many individuals take it on in their own unique way. And the other thing is, it's not necessarily even working from home. Freelancers are able to work wherever. And that is a great benefit to people with mobility issues and with disabilities, because there are a lot of co-working spaces out there where they don't have to commute all the way in to the office. They can actually go to a co-working space, collaborate with other people around them. So we look at it like it's a black or white. You're at home or you're at the office. But people are popping up in coffee shops, co-working spaces. There's one in Niagara that I talk to regularly, and they do help each other and they support each other. So there's not, working from home is not a black or white. We have Skype, we have Google Hangouts. I spend most of my time collaborating on those platforms if I have to. We work around it. There's always a way to work around it. And then you can always go into the office and chat with them. So I would just challenge people to think of it not as just being at home on your own and in your pajamas all day. Like the freelance world as it stands now is a lot of smart people making really innovative ways of collaborating with each other.
And can I pick up on that point you made about those with disabilities? What can businesses do to utilize these new technologies and these new ways of working, this changing nature of work, to incorporate more folks with disabilities into traditional and not so traditional work environments?
This is one that I am very close to, just because I myself am deaf. So working from a different area, I can use the Skype and audio headphones so that I can have better conversations with my team members. But what we do is we create models that have maybe a hybrid group of people that aren't full-time and they aren't freelance. They're kind of on the cusp. They float around as needed. They provide their skill sets, and we provide them co-working space so that they don't, if they have mobility issues, they don't have to come all the way into the office, which helps them, reduces the amount of traffic and allows them to be closer to their family if they need to be. So mobility is definitely a huge thing when we're looking at the freelance world, because they are able to work closer to home and take care of themselves. But also the tools that we have on our computer every day are a lot more helpful for people with visually impaired issues and hearing impaired issues.
Jim and Ted, do you have anything to add to that? And I'm going next to the audience for questions. So.
Well, on the disability issue, or for people working with injuries, for example, it's a constant challenge for workers to try and win accommodation from employers generally, because of the extra cost or logistical differences that are required to assign someone to alternate duties. So we're always working to try and help members with disabilities or health challenges or injuries to find alternate work and to organize that for them. Now, you could say that some of the technology or homework and that kind of thing opens up new opportunities to do that logistically, but in the context of a labor market where there's a constant cushion of unemployed or underemployed people, the employer generally doesn't feel compelled to find alternate duties for that person. And the so-called gig economy, this shift towards precarious work, actually has created a management culture in many places that relies on that just-in-time type of hiring practice. I would say the net impact is likely to be negative on the ability of unions to help disabled workers to find alternate work. The technology makes it technically feasible, but the economic conditions of it mean that our ability to press employers to show some long-term commitment to workers who've had an injury or disability is going to be undermined on a net basis by it.
Ted?
Well, we've been promoting this idea of an agile workforce, and I've learned from Jim over the course of this panel that if I repeat the words agile as much as he's talked about precarious, maybe we'll have a balance there. But if you think about the ability of somebody, one day maybe they were walking the halls, doing inventory counts. If we can make it easier for them to supplement they were doing with technology, whether it be Google Glass or drones or things that don't require the same physicality that we would have thought of labor in the past, and we can make people more agile than they were, I think that will be an advantage for us.
Okay. Questions from the audience? Kim.
Thanks. Kim Warburton, GE. So one of the things that you talk a lot about, this full-time, freelance, agile workforce, one of the factors that's been in there a lot is this whole idea of benefits. So if you're a freelancer, it doesn't come with the benefits. And so we've, sort of looked at it as an either-or. And I'm just wondering if any of you are aware of a disruptor in the benefit area that would support this kind of model, because traditionally the cost of somebody doing that privately has been very expensive. But I would think maybe that there's something in there that could kind of disrupt that and then support this new type of workforce.
You okay if I take that?
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the reasons why we built JobBliss was we wanted to have the freelancers to have the ability to book themselves up. And in doing so, because we have critical mass of freelancers, we're able to start implementing benefits within the system. We're also adding insurance and some learning capabilities. But the benefits, because of the poll that we did, the biggest obstacles to the freelancers to be successful were having enough work booked up, and the second one was benefits. So bringing benefits in is very easy. We've talked to a lot of benefits providers, and because there are thousands of people on the platform, we're able to do that without any large charge to it. So what we're adding on with the bookkeeping, everything else, like the goal is to make it so that it is disruptive enough that freelancers can have everything they need in one spot to be full-time and actually have job security.
And does the freelancer pay for the benefit, the
They
premium?
would pay just like in a full-time job where you would pay into benefits. We would create a benefits package that they could choose depending on their family size.
But they pay for it, not the customer that they're working for? Is that the thing?
No, it's just like a full-time job. They would pay for it themselves.
Well, our full-time jobs, we generally negotiate the benefits, so the employer is paying all or most of it.
I've never had that. You're
Yeah.
lucky.
Well, that's what we're trying to preserve. We can try to organize some benefit provision, group benefit provision. For example, our freelance local has set up something like that, and our other community chapters where the individuals are still paying, but at least they're doing it at a group rate rather than an individual
Well, that's what we
rate.
put together,
Right.
yeah,
Okay.
a
So
group rate.
we're on similar tracks, but our goal would ultimately to have employers recognize that contributions to pensions and benefits are a normal part, should be a normal part of the compensation package, and that's where our ability to negotiate some commitment from the employers to make a contribution to that is a crucial variable.
I think the biggest takeaway that I've had so far, is that the U.S. is doing this. They're starting to understand, but they haven't put it together yet. And I know there are obstacles, but we need to figure out collectively how we bring it together. And so, I mean, these are all important elements of the puzzle, but we need to start putting it together, or someone else is going to do it for us.
For us, the reality is we will typically pay independent contractors the equivalent of more per hour than we would pay a full-time equivalent because we're pricing in the market cost of their benefits. So, that's not unusual for us. I think some of the things that I've seen in terms of the private market solutions to not just benefits, but also the other things that freelancers typically can't get, whether it's credit cards or bank loans. You heard from Joanna Griffiths saying that she had to put down a $20,000 in escrow to get a $20,000 credit limit on a credit card. Makes no sense, whatever. So, there's new Canadian companies like Clearbank that's starting up, which is trying to look at cash flows from people's freelance incomes to be able to assess credit risk better than, maybe some of the large financial institutions.
I feel like we're just getting started here, and I know there are a couple of questions in the audience, but I'm getting the cutoff signal both from Trevor and Liam here. So can I just ask our panelists really quick final thoughts that you'd like to leave with the audience members about the changing workplace and things that they should be mindful of, or just closing thoughts to reflect on? Jim, we'll start with you.
Flexibility is a word that can mean 100 different things. And so the effects of flexibility, I think, are going to depend on how it's done and what the goals are. So what is the motive of flexibility in work arrangements? If the motive is solely to reduce the labor cost of the operation that's occurring and nothing else, then it's probably going to end unhappily. And it's hard to see what the social benefits are of allowing employers greater flexibility to hire people on a just-in-time basis without any requirement that they offer secure or predictable hours or any benefits on top of the direct wage. And in the context of a labor market that's chronically underemployed for labor writ large, I know there are specific skills like software engineers and so on that are in high demand, but labor as a whole is chronically underutilized. So in the vast majority of jobs, you have a condition of excess supply, which means there's a fundamental advantage in the bargaining power for the employer to set a contract that's favorable to them, not just in terms of money, but in terms of the terms of it. So what are the motives for flexibility? Who controls the flexibility? Is there do workers have any power to make flexibility work for them instead of just the employer? In some cases that can happen. But in most cases, the worker is left waiting for news about when their next shift is going to be and hoping like hell that they are going to get another shift or at least enough shifts this week to pay the bills. That is the reality of so-called flexible work for the vast majority of people in society who have to do it. And I think that's what we have to keep in mind as we're considering the policy responses to this.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Angie?
So we know that there's going to be over 50 million freelance workers in the US alone, and Canada's following suit. And if we want to be the head of innovation, we have to recognize that this is happening. And yes, there are going to be issues around it, but we need to put our heads together and collectively solve it and build new flexible models that will help both the employer and the freelancer build a long-term relationship that benefits both of them. So I would challenge Ontario. You have it in, we have the brains here to do this. It's not going away. So here's our opportunity to keep this innovation in Ontario and in Canada and actually build something that will help the economy with these amazing skilled minds that we want to keep here.
Great. Ted?
I had the opportunity to drive through Rochester, New York last year, and it is amazing to see sort of what has happened to that town. And when you think about how many people Kodak had employed and what their business model was based on, it is very sad. They were great employers. They had benefits like guaranteeing the children of its employees jobs. But at the same time, they weren't looking at a workforce that could change from manufacturing chemicals to looking at the future of digital. And the need for a different type of workforce that can change like that is necessary to be able to survive and thrive.
Well, great. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me thank Jim, Angie, and Ted.